I remember the conversation vividly. It was one of those late-night chats with friends when the topic somehow drifted to weird and unsettling things people have experienced at home. One friend mentioned how she once found footprints in her carpet that didn't belong to anyone in her family. Another talked about hearing footsteps upstairs when she lived alone. That night, the story stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. There's something about the idea of someone else being in your home, someone you don't know, someone who shouldn't be there, that chills you to the bone. It's more than just a breach of privacy. It's a violation of the very space where you expect to be safest. That's why I want to share some true stories I've come across. 3 different accounts of uninvited guests showing up in the most terrifying ways. These aren't urban legends or exaggerated tales. They're real people's experiences, and they left permanent marks on their lives. I'll start with the first story, about a woman who lived alone and gradually realized that her sanctuary had been compromised. Reading it, you'll understand just how deeply unsettling it can be to discover that your home isn't just a place you live in anymore. It's a place someone else has been living in, too, without your knowledge. The woman, let's call her Sarah, lived in a modest apartment on the edge of town. It was a small, quiet building, nothing fancy, but it was hers. She enjoyed the solitude, working from home, reading late into the night, and decorating the space with little personal touches. Over time, she began to notice small oddities. Things weren't where she remembered leaving them. Her keys would sometimes be on the kitchen counter instead of the hook by the door. The bathroom towel was slightly damp when she was sure she hadn't used it. At first, she chalked it up to forgetfulness or exhaustion, convincing herself she must be misplacing things or absent-mindedly using towels. But then came the noises. Late at night, when the house was silent, she started hearing creaks and faint footsteps, soft but distinct, coming from the living room or the hall outside her bedroom. The first time it happened, she froze, heart pounding. She told herself it was just the old building settling, or maybe the wind. But the sounds persisted, becoming a nightly occurrence that left her anxious and jumpy. She began double-checking every door and window before going to bed, even installing new locks, but it didn't stop. One evening, after a long day of work, Sarah decided to stay up a little later than usual. She sat on the couch, scrolling on her phone, trying to ignore the growing unease in her chest. It was around midnight when she heard it again, a soft shuffle from the bedroom. Her breath caught, and she slowly turned her head toward the door. At first, she saw nothing, but then, just at the edge of the dim light, a shadow moved. It was fleeting, almost like a trick of her eyes, but there was no mistaking it. Her pulse quickened as she realized what she was seeing. Someone was there. Someone had been in her apartment, quietly, repeatedly, without her noticing. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. She wasn't alone. Someone had been living in her home, hiding in the shadows, watching her. Panic surged, but so did a strange determination. She couldn't just run or call for help without knowing who or what she was dealing with. Sarah grabbed her phone silently and edged toward the bedroom door. She didn't want to alert whoever it was that she was onto them. Her mind raced. How long had this been going on? Had they been watching her every day, moving around when she wasn't looking? The thought of a stranger lurking in her personal space made her skin crawl. She remembered reading about cases where people lived in hidden spaces inside homes, crawl spaces, attics, sometimes for days or weeks at a time. Could it be the same here? She crept into the hallway, eyes scanning the shadows. The apartment was small, but every corner seemed to hold a potential hiding spot. Her heart thundered as she silently moved toward the living room, where she'd heard the footsteps most often. There, she spotted something out of place, a small pile of clothes, neatly folded but definitely not hers, tucked behind the armchair. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Her mind flashed back to the missing items, the moved keys, the damp towel. It all made sense now. This person had been using her things, blending in seamlessly enough to avoid detection. The thought was terrifying. She felt violated, her personal space invaded in the most intimate way imaginable. Without making a sound, Sarah dialed 911 and whispered into the phone, explaining the situation. The dispatcher assured her help was on the way and advised her to find a safe place to wait. She retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind her, her breath shallow and fast. Every creak and shuffle outside sent waves of terror through her body. Minutes passed like hours before she heard the familiar sound of sirens approaching. The police arrived, sweeping through the apartment with flashlights and cautious steps. They found signs that someone had been living in the space, a small stash of food hidden behind the couch, a makeshift bed in the closet, and footprints on the carpet that didn't belong to Sarah. But the intruder was gone, vanished before the officers arrived. Sarah was left shaken, unable to sleep for nights. The police suggested changing locks and installing security cameras, all of which she did. But even with the new measures, the feeling lingered that she had lost something precious, her sense of safety in her own home. The invisible presence that had been there, the idea that someone could slip in and out unnoticed, haunted her. This story struck a chord with me because it's such a stark reminder that our homes, the places we consider sanctuaries, can be vulnerable. The idea that an uninvited guest could live alongside you, hidden in plain sight, is the kind of fear that stays with you long after the doors are locked and the lights are on. It's not just about physical security, it's about the mental and emotional cost of knowing your private space has been invaded. As I shared this story with my friends that night, their faces grew pale, and the room fell quiet. We all felt the weight of that fear, the primal dread of the unknown intruder in our midst. And while Sarah's story is just one of many, it's a chilling example of how real and close that threat can be, lurking just beyond the edge of perception, waiting to be discovered. Not long after Sarah's story, I heard about another unsettling experience, this time involving an entire family who returned home from a vacation, only to find their sanctuary had been breached in a way that no one could have expected. It was a reminder that even the safest, busiest homes are not immune to intrusion, and that sometimes, the threat hides in the most ordinary moments. The family, let's call them the Johnsons, had planned a week-long trip to the coast. They were excited to escape the city, leaving behind the usual chaos for some much-needed rest. Before leaving, they took all the sensible precautions. They locked every door and window, set alarms, and even had a neighbor keep an eye on the place. Confident that their home would remain untouched, they settled into their vacation mode. But when they returned, something was off the moment they stepped inside. The front door was locked, as expected, but the faint smell of something unfamiliar hung in the air. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. As they moved through each room, subtle signs of disturbance became clear. A drawer in the kitchen was left slightly ajar. A family photo was knocked off a shelf but hadn't shattered. Personal items were misplaced, nothing overtly stolen, but enough to send a chill down their spines. At first, they thought maybe one of the kids had come home early or a family friend had visited. But no one had. The neighbor confirmed no one had come in. The Johnsons changed the locks immediately, thinking that would solve the problem. Yet, over the following days, strange things escalated. Doors that had been locked were found unlocked. Lights flickered on and off. Personal items started disappearing. A favorite watch, a set of keys, even a small amount of cash vanished without explanation. Most chilling were the noises. Footsteps pacing the hallway at night, whispers just beyond hearing, the faint creak of floorboards when the house should have been empty. The family's unease grew, and so did their paranoia. They installed a security system with cameras, motion sensors, and alarms, hoping to catch whoever was behind these intrusions. But the disturbances didn't stop. The cameras showed nothing unusual. No forced entry, no visitors. It was as if whoever was in the house knew exactly how to avoid detection. One night, the father, Mark, decided he couldn't wait any longer. Determined to protect his family, he stayed up late, sitting quietly in the basement. The rest of the family was asleep upstairs, trusting Mark to keep watch. Hours passed with only the sound of the house settling and the distant hum of the city outside. Then, just as he was about to give up and head to bed, he heard it, footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming down the stairs. Mark's heart pounded as he gripped the flashlight tightly. The beam caught a figure moving swiftly in the shadows. Without hesitation, Mark confronted the intruder, demanding to know who they were and why they were invading his home. The intruder lunged at him, and a desperate struggle ensued in the cramped basement. It was raw, violent, and terrifying. Mark fought with every ounce of strength, trying to protect his family and himself. The intruder was desperate, wild-eyed, and dangerous. Eventually, the attacker fled through a back door left unlocked in the chaos, vanishing into the night. Mark was left bruised, shaken, but alive. The police arrived shortly after, but the intruder was nowhere to be found. They scoured the house for clues, finding subtle signs that someone had been living inside the walls or hiding in unused spaces. The family was left to rebuild their shattered sense of security, installing new locks, reinforcing doors, and adding more cameras. But the psychological impact lingered long after the physical damage was repaired. Every creak in the night, every shadow in the corner of an eye, reminded them of the violation they had endured. The house no longer felt like a safe haven. It was a place haunted by the memory of the intruder's presence, a place where trust was broken. The Johnsons moved cautiously from that point on. They changed routines, installed timers on lights, and rarely left the house unattended. Friends and relatives noticed the strain, the hypervigilance that had settled over the family. It was as if the intruder's visit had shattered not just the locks on their doors, but the very foundation of their peace of mind. This story stayed with me because it highlighted how invasive and persistent these uninvited guests can be. It's one thing to hear noises or find a misplaced item, but to have a direct confrontation, a fight for survival in your own home, that takes the fear to an entirely different level. The Johnsons' experience showed how someone could exploit even the best precautions, slipping through cracks and shadows, turning a family sanctuary into a battleground. As I recounted this story to those same friends, the room grew heavy with unease. We all understood how quickly safety can be shattered, how fragile the boundary is between security and danger. It was a reminder that vigilance is essential, but even that may not be enough to keep uninvited guests at bay. The Johnsons' ordeal was far from over, though. Even after the intruder's escape, strange occurrences continued. Items would disappear and reappear in odd places. Doors would sometimes be left unlocked despite their efforts. The feeling of being watched never truly left them. It was as if the intruder had left a mark on the house itself, an invisible footprint that refused to fade. Their story is a stark example of how invasion of space doesn't just happen once. It can linger, echoing in the quiet moments and in the corners of the mind long after the physical threat has passed. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying uninvited guest is the one who stays in your thoughts, refusing to be evicted. A few weeks after hearing about the Johnsons' ordeal, I came across another story that struck a different chord but was no less chilling. A man renting a remote cabin for what was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. The kind of trip where you escape the noise and distractions of everyday life, seeking solitude among the trees. But solitude can sometimes bring its own kind of fear. This man, let's call him David, had booked a small cabin miles from the nearest town. It was the perfect spot, secluded, quiet, surrounded by forest, with only the occasional bird call or rustling leaves to break the silence. He was looking forward to some time alone, away from the demands of work and the buzz of city life. David arrived on a Friday afternoon, unpacked his things, and settled in quickly. The first night was uneventful. He enjoyed the warmth of the fireplace and the soft glow of lanterns, feeling a calm he hadn't felt in months. But on the second night, things started to shift. Around midnight, David was awakened by the faint sound of footsteps outside the cabin. At first, he thought it might be an animal, deer or raccoon perhaps, but the steps were too deliberate, too steady. He peered out the window, the darkness pressing in like a wall. There was nothing visible, just shadows and the silhouette of trees swaying in the night breeze. Unease crept in, but he told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe the wind had shifted debris or branches. Still, he double-checked the locks on the cabin doors and windows before settling back down. The next morning, things felt off. Outside, he found footprints in the dirt, barefoot, leading up to the cabin but stopping just short of the porch. There was no sign of anyone now, but the evidence was unmistakable. Someone had been there, lurking nearby. David called the local authorities to report the trespassing, but the officers explained that this was a remote area, and without an actual sighting or more evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They advised him to stay vigilant, lock up tightly, and notify them if anything else happened. That night, David set up extra security measures. He installed battery-powered motion sensors and a few cameras around the cabin's perimeter. The cameras were basic, but enough to capture any movement nearby. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Footsteps circled the cabin at odd hours. Sometimes, David would catch glimpses of movement from the corner of his eye, a fleeting shadow among the trees, a glimpse of a figure slipping through the darkness. He never saw the person clearly, but the sensation of being watched grew heavier with each passing night. The cameras recorded nothing. No intruder appeared in the footage, no matter how carefully David checked. It was as if whoever was out there knew exactly how to avoid detection, moving with the silence of a ghost. David's nerves frayed. He found it hard to sleep, jumping at every creak and snap of a twig. The cabin, once a haven, became a place of constant tension. He started carrying a flashlight and a pocket knife whenever he went outside, ready to defend himself if necessary. One evening, he sat on the porch, trying to calm his racing mind. The forest stretched out before him, dark and endless, the shadows deepening as the sun dipped below the horizon. Suddenly, a noise, a soft rustle, came from the tree line. He stood up slowly, heart pounding, shining his flashlight toward the sound. For a brief moment, he caught a glimpse of something, a figure, crouched low, watching him from the edge of the woods. Then, just as quickly, it melted away into the night. David's breath hitched. He knew then that the feeling of being watched was no illusion. Someone had been living nearby, lurking in the woods, observing him. The realization was both terrifying and deeply unsettling. He contacted the authorities again, sharing the sighting and asking for increased patrols. But the remote location made regular checks difficult. The officers promised to keep an eye out but warned that response times could be slow. David decided to cut his trip short. He packed up early the next day, leaving the cabin and the surrounding forest behind. But even as he drove away, the sense of unease lingered. The idea that someone had been so close, so hidden, watching his every move without ever revealing themselves, left a mark on him. Back in his apartment, David installed extra locks and security cameras, determined never to feel that vulnerable again. Yet, despite all the precautions, the memory of those nights, the footsteps, the shadows, the silent watcher, remained with him. It was a reminder that sometimes, the scariest intruder isn't one you confront face to face, but one who hides just beyond the edge of sight, leaving you with a perpetual sense of being watched. This story resonated differently than Sarah's or the Johnsons'. There was no direct confrontation, no fight for survival, just an overwhelming sense of vulnerability in a place meant for peace. It showed how uninvited guests can invade not just your home, but your mind, creating a lasting psychological scar. When I shared David's experience with friends, the mood shifted once again. We talked about that terrible feeling of eyes on you when no one is there, the paranoia that creeps in and refuses to let go. It's a fear that stays long after the footsteps have faded, and the intruder has disappeared into the shadows. David's story reminded me how important it is to trust your instincts, to listen when something feels wrong even if you can't prove it. And it showed how the scars left by these encounters aren't just physical. They live in the quiet moments, in the flicker of a shadow, in the knowledge that you are never truly alone. What ties Sarah's, the Johnsons', and David's stories together isn't just the terrifying presence of intruders in their homes or spaces. It's the aftermath, the way these invasions shatter the sense of safety and leave deep, lasting scars that go beyond physical damage. I want to explore that lingering shadow, the invisible weight these uninvited guests leave behind long after they're gone. Sarah's story began with subtle disturbances, a misplaced key, a damp towel, before revealing a stranger living secretly in her apartment. The breach was intimate, personal, and deeply violating. Even after she changed locks and installed cameras, the paranoia stayed. Every creak, every flicker of light, became a reminder that someone had been inside, unseen but dangerously close. Her home, once a sanctuary, became a place of suspicion and fear. The Johnson family faced something more overt and violent, a direct confrontation with an intruder who attacked in their own basement. Their house, once filled with laughter and routine, became a battleground. Even after reinforcing security, the strange occurrences didn't stop, and the psychological toll was immense. Trust was broken not just in the intruder but in the very walls that were supposed to keep them safe. Their home became haunted by the memory of violence and violation. David's experience in the remote cabin was quieter but no less profound. The presence of an unseen watcher lurking just beyond the edge of vision left him with a persistent feeling of vulnerability and fear. The intruder never revealed themselves, but the psychological impact was lasting. His safe haven in the woods turned into a place fraught with anxiety and the gnawing fear that he was not alone. Even back in his apartment, the shadow of that experience followed him. All three stories highlight a common thread. The invasion of personal space by unknown individuals destroys more than just property or physical safety. It undermines the very foundation of one's peace of mind. The home, which should be a refuge, becomes a source of dread. The victims don't just worry about break-ins. They grapple with the constant feeling of being watched, the terror of the unknown, and the shattering of trust in their environment. These invasions leave psychological scars that manifest in sleepless nights, heightened anxiety, and a pervasive sense of vulnerability. The victims often become hypervigilant, changing routines, installing elaborate security systems, and living with a persistent fear that the intruder might return. It's a mental prison as much as a physical one. What's especially cruel about these experiences is how they blur the line between reality and fear. The intruders might be gone, or perhaps never caught, but the fear they instilled remains palpable, as real as the locks on the doors. This unresolved tension can lead to long-term effects like post-traumatic stress, depression, or a chronic sense of insecurity that colors every aspect of daily life. Another unsettling aspect is how these intrusions often involve a degree of personal knowledge or familiarity. Sarah's intruder used her belongings, the Johnsons' attacker knew the layout of their home, and David's watcher moved like a shadow. This intimate knowledge deepens the violation, making the victims feel exposed and powerless. These experiences also reveal the limits of physical security measures. Locks, alarms, and cameras can only do so much when an intruder is determined, knowledgeable, or simply invisible. The real battle happens in the mind, where fear and uncertainty are the hardest locks to pick. Sharing these stories also brings up an important point about vigilance and trusting one's instincts. In every case, the victims noticed something was wrong long before the full invasion became clear. That nagging feeling of unease, the small signs ignored or rationalized, were warnings that something wasn't right. Listening to those instincts can be crucial, even though it's often difficult to accept or act on vague fears. Reflecting on all this, it becomes clear that uninvited guests don't just come through doors or windows. They enter through cracks in our awareness, our routines, and our sense of security. They exploit not just physical vulnerabilities but emotional ones. And the impact is profound and enduring. These stories also remind us of the importance of community and support. After such invasions, victims often feel isolated, ashamed, or reluctant to share their experiences. But speaking out, connecting with others who faced similar situations, and seeking help can be vital steps toward reclaiming a sense of safety and control. The haunting presence of an intruder, whether seen or unseen, changes the relationship with home forever. It forces a reckoning with vulnerability and the unpredictable nature of safety. The scars may fade with time, but the experience often leaves a permanent imprint, a reminder that the boundaries of our private spaces can be breached in ways that challenge our deepest sense of security. As I gathered these stories and reflected on them, I realize how deeply these encounters resonate with a universal fear, the fear that our personal sanctuaries can be violated without warning, that the unknown can lurk just beyond our perception, and that safety is never guaranteed. It's a fear that connects all of us, whether we've experienced it firsthand or live with the knowledge that it could happen at any time. The psychological aftermath of these invasions is a quiet, ongoing struggle. It's the nights spent double-checking locks, the hesitation before opening a door, the constant scanning of shadows. It's the invisible weight carried in the mind and heart long after the physical threat has passed. In the end, these stories are a stark reminder that home is more than a place. It's a state of mind, a fragile balance of trust and security that can be shattered in an instant. And while locks and alarms can help protect the body, healing the mind requires time, support, and a recognition of the profound impact these uninvited guests leave behind. Thinking back on all the stories I've shared, the woman living with a secret intruder, the family's violent confrontation, the man haunted by an unseen watcher, they all share something deeper than just the facts of invasion or trespass. What ties them together is the profound disruption of safety, the shattering of an almost sacred trust we place in our homes, and the lasting fear that follows. When someone uninvited crosses the threshold into your personal space, it's not just your property that's violated. It's your sense of security, your peace of mind, the very foundation that makes a house a home. The impact is often invisible but no less real. A trembling in the quiet hours, a shadow in the corner of your vision, a tightening in your chest when you hear an unexpected noise. These experiences alter how you move through your world, how you relate to your surroundings, and how you trust yourself to be safe. In Sarah's case, the intruder's presence was hidden but constant, living unnoticed in her apartment. That kind of invasion is uniquely terrifying because it erases the boundary between private and public, known and unknown. She wasn't just a victim of theft or break-in. She was a victim of ongoing intrusion, someone who could be there at any moment, watching, using her belongings, blending into her life without her knowledge. The fear lingers long after the intruder is gone because the invisible wounds run deep. The Johnson family faced a more overt threat, an attack in their own basement that forced a desperate fight for survival. Their story highlights the raw danger of such invasions and the way they transform a place of comfort into a battlefield. Even after the intruder fled, the psychological damage remained. The house, once filled with warmth and routine, became a place haunted by memories of violence and fear. Their experience shows that the trauma isn't just physical, it's emotional and mental, reshaping how they experience their home and each other. David's story takes a different angle, focusing on the unseen watcher lurking just beyond the edge of sight. His fear was silent but no less real, a constant feeling of being observed, of never truly being alone. It's a reminder that sometimes the most frightening intruders are those we never actually see, shadows, whispers, footsteps that remind us how vulnerable we truly are. The psychological toll of that fear, the way it invades even peaceful solitude, is a powerful testament to the lasting impact of these experiences. All three stories share a chilling truth. Uninvited guests don't just break into homes, they break into lives and minds. They shatter the illusion of safety and leave behind a residue of fear that colors every moment. This fear is deeply personal and often isolating. Victims may feel ashamed, reluctant to share their experiences, or unsure how to reclaim their sense of security. Yet, speaking out and seeking support is crucial. It's a step toward healing and regaining control. These invasions also reveal the limitations of physical security measures. Locks, alarms, and cameras can help, but they can't fully protect against the psychological impact or the cunning of determined intruders. True safety involves trusting one's instincts, being vigilant, and fostering a community that looks out for one another. It's a balance between practical precautions and emotional resilience. What strikes me most is how these stories underscore the fragile boundary between safety and danger. Our homes are meant to be sanctuaries, but that sanctuary can be breached in ways that are both terrifying and deeply personal. The uninvited guest is a universal fear, whether it's a stranger in the night, a shadow in the woods, or the haunting presence of someone who knows your space better than you do. Reflecting on all this, I'm reminded that vigilance and awareness are essential, but so is compassion, for ourselves and for others who have faced these violations. The scars left by uninvited guests are real, but they need not define us. With support, understanding, and the courage to reclaim our spaces, we can begin to heal. In the end, the stories of Sarah, the Johnsons, and David serve as cautionary tales and reminders. They warn us to be alert, to trust our instincts, and to take seriously the signs that something isn't right. But they also invite us to recognize the profound human cost of these invasions, the fear, the loss, and the resilience that follows. Uninvited guests shatter more than glass or locks, they fracture the sense of home itself. And while the physical doors can be secured again, the emotional doors require patience, care, and time to close. These stories linger because they tap into a primal fear that many of us share, the fear that our own homes, our personal sanctuaries, can be invaded. As unsettling as these tales are, they also remind us of our strength and the importance of community. We are not alone in these fears, and by sharing our experiences, listening, and supporting one another, we can begin to rebuild what was broken. Vigilance, trust, and empathy become the real keys to safety, not just in our homes, but in our lives. So, the next time you hear a noise in the night or feel a shadow just beyond your sight, remember these stories. Remember that the fear is real, but so is the courage to face it. And perhaps, in that remembering, we find a way to reclaim our spaces and protect the fragile sanctuaries we call home.